This is the nitty-gritty time as far as being nervous, opening night.
August 1969, the International Hotel in Las Vegas, and Elvis Presley is absolutely terrified. Not nervous, not anxious, terrified. This is a man who once moved his hips on national television and caused a moral panic. A man who had girls fainting in the aisles, who sold out stadiums, who changed the entire landscape of American music. But right now, in this moment, backstage at the International Hotel, he's convinced it's over. His career, his relevance, everything. Because Elvis hasn't performed live in 8 years. 8 years. That's an eternity in entertainment. That's long enough for the world to forget you existed. Long enough for a new generation to grow up never having seen you on stage. Long enough to become irrelevant. And Elvis knows it. His hands are shaking. He's packing backstage like a caged animal. The sweat is already pouring down his face and he hasn't even walked out there yet. The people around him can see it. The fear is radiating off him in waves. This isn't the confident young man who swaggered onto Ed Sullivan. This is a 34-year-old man who spent the last decade making forgettable movies, watching his career slowly die, wondering if anyone still cares. He's asking everyone the same question. What if they don't show up? What if I go out there and nobody cares anymore? Think about that for a second. Elvis Presley, Elvis, genuinely believing that the world has moved on without him, that he's been forgotten, that he's washed up at 34 years old. That's the level of fear we're talking about. And here's what makes this moment so devastating. He's right to be scared. Because 1969 isn't 1956. The world has changed. Music has changed. The Beatles happened. The Rolling Stones happened. Woodstock is happening that same month. Elvis is facing a generation that grew up after his prime, a generation that might see him as their parents' music, as something old and irrelevant. So when he finally walks out on that stage, when the curtain goes up and the lights hit him, Elvis isn't performing. He's fighting for his life. He's proving to himself and to everyone watching that he still matters, that he's still got it, that he's not done yet. And the show is incredible. It's electric. It's everything he needed it to be. The audience goes insane. The reviews are glowing. Elvis Presley is back, and it's not just a comeback, it's a resurrection. But here's what nobody talks about when they tell that story. Here's what gets erased from the official narrative, from the documentaries, from the carefully curated legacy. Who was there with him in that moment? Not later, not after the success, not when it was safe and profitable and easy to attach yourself to his name, but right then, in that moment of pure terror, when he genuinely believed he might fail, when he was at his most vulnerable, most human, most afraid. Who held his hand? It was Vernon, his father, the man who had been there since the beginning, since the two-room house in Tupelo, since they had nothing. Vernon was backstage, praying with his son, telling him he was going to be great, believing in him when Elvis couldn't believe in himself. It was the Memphis Mafia, the guys who had been with him for years, Red West, Sonny West, Joe Esposito, Charlie Hodge. These weren't employees, these were brothers. They were the ones who saw Elvis break down in private, who knew his fears, who loved him not because he was Elvis Presley, but because he was their friend. It was his cousins, Billy Smith, Gene Smith, the guys from Memphis who remembered when Elvis was just a kid with a dream and a cheap guitar. They were there because family shows up, because blood matters, because you don't abandon someone you love when they're scared. These were the people in that room. These were the people who mattered to Elvis when it counted. And you know who wasn't there? Priscilla. Oh, she was in Vegas. She was at the hotel. She showed up for the performance. But in that moment backstage, when Elvis was falling apart, when he needed someone to tell him he wasn't crazy for being this scared, she wasn't the one holding his hand. And maybe that doesn't seem important. Maybe you're thinking, so what? She was his wife. She supported him. She was there. But here's why it matters. Here's why this moment is the key to understanding everything that came after. Because the people who were there that night, the people who loved Elvis when he was terrified and vulnerable and convinced he was finished, those are the same people who would be systematically erased from his legacy. Vernon, who prayed with his son backstage, would be manipulated on his deathbed to hand over control of everything Elvis built to the woman who wasn't in that room. The Memphis Mafia, the brothers who stood by Elvis through his darkest fears, would be fired, pushed out, written out of the official story like they never existed. The cousins, the family who showed up when it mattered, would be denied access to their own relative's home, treated like strangers, cut off from the legacy they helped build. And the woman who wasn't holding his hand that night, the woman who was already building her own separate life, who was already looking past Elvis toward her own future. She would take everything. She would control the narrative. She would own the estate. She would position herself as the keeper of his memory, the authority on who Elvis really was, the gatekeeper to his entire legacy. And the people who were actually there, who actually knew him, who actually loved him when he was just a scared man in a dressing room wondering if the world still cared. They would be locked out of their own history. That's what happened, and it all started the moment Elvis walked off that stage, still shaking, still afraid, and realized he'd survived. Because survival meant there was something worth taking, and someone was already planning exactly how to take it. Here's what you need to understand about Elvis Presley. He never stopped being that scared kid from Tupelo. The fame didn't fix it. The money didn't fix it. The sold-out shows and the screaming fans and the gold records, none of it fixed the fundamental terror that lived inside him. The fear that it could all disappear tomorrow. The fear that he wasn't good enough. The fear of being alone. And the only people who could calm that fear were the people who knew him before any of it happened. Vernon understood it because he'd been there in the poverty, in the struggle, when they were living in public housing and wondering where the next meal was coming from. Vernon knew that Elvis never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. That's why he could talk his son down from the ledge when the panic attacks hit at 3 in the morning. That's why Elvis trusted him completely. Billy Smith understood it because they'd grown up together. They were cousins, but more than that, they were best friends. Billy had seen Elvis as a teenager, awkward and insecure, trying to figure out who he was. When Elvis couldn't sleep, when the pills weren't working, when the loneliness was crushing him, Billy would sit with him for hours. Not trying to fix anything, just being there, because that's what family does. The Memphis Mafia understood it because they'd been through the fire with him. They'd seen Elvis at his best and his absolute worst. They'd seen the generosity, how he'd buy Cadillacs for strangers, how he'd pay people's medical bills, how he couldn't say no to anyone who needed help. But they'd also seen the darkness, the depression, the addiction, the paranoia, and they stayed anyway, not because he was paying them. They stayed because they loved him. These were the people Elvis trusted with his life. The people who saw him as human, not as an icon. The people who could tell him the truth, who could call him out on his nonsense, who could remind him who he really was when the fame and the drugs and the isolation made him forget. And then there was Priscilla. Now let's be very clear about something. In the beginning, Elvis loved her, genuinely, deeply loved her. He was obsessed with her. He built her into his fantasy of the perfect woman, beautiful, obedient, devoted entirely to him. But here's the problem with building someone into your fantasy. Real people don't stay in the box you create for them. Real people grow. They change. They want their own lives. And Priscilla wanted her own life. She wanted a career. She wanted independence. She wanted to be more than just Elvis Presley's wife sitting at home waiting for him to come back from wherever he was. And honestly, you can't blame her for that. Being married to Elvis was suffocating. The control, the rules, the expectations, it would drive anyone crazy. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because while Elvis was spiraling, while he was drowning in prescription drugs and paranoia and crushing loneliness, while he was clinging to the people who'd known him since the beginning, Priscilla was building an exit strategy. She was taking acting classes. She was making connections in Hollywood. She was creating relationships and opportunities that had nothing to do with being Elvis's wife. She was preparing for life after Elvis. And in 1973, she made it official. She filed for divorce. Now here's what the official narrative tells you. Priscilla loved Elvis, but the marriage was broken. They divorced amicably. She moved on with her life. End of story. But that's not the whole truth. Because if Priscilla was really done with Elvis, if she'd really moved on, if she was really building her own independent life separate from him, then why did she stay so close to Vernon? Think about that. You divorce someone in 1973. You're done with the marriage. You're starting your new life. Why are you cultivating a relationship with your ex-husband's father? Why are you making sure you're still connected to the family? Why are you positioning yourself as the concerned ex-wife who still cares, who's still involved, who's still part of the inner circle? Vernon was old. Vernon was sick. Vernon had been managing Elvis's business affairs for years and he was overwhelmed. And Priscilla, according to people who were there, made herself indispensable to him. She'd call to check in. She'd offer advice. She'd position herself as someone who understood the business side of things, who could help navigate the complexity of Elvis's empire. And Vernon, grieving the end of his son's marriage, grateful for the connection to his granddaughter Lisa Marie, trusted her. But here's the question nobody was asking at the time. If you're really moving on with your life, why do you need to maintain that level of involvement with your ex-husband's father? The people who loved Elvis, the cousins, the Memphis Mafia, the friends from Memphis, they saw what was happening. They saw Priscilla staying close to Vernon even as she was building her new life in California. They saw her maintaining control over access to Lisa Marie. They saw her keeping one foot in the Presley world while publicly declaring she was moving forward. And they didn't like it. But what could they say? She was Lisa Marie's mother. She had every right to be involved in her daughter's life. And if Vernon wanted to stay close to his granddaughter's mother, who were they to interfere? So they watched, and they waited, and they hoped that when Elvis eventually died, because by the mid-70s, everyone close to him knew it was coming, they hoped Vernon would protect the family. They hoped the people who'd actually been there, who'd actually loved Elvis unconditionally, would have a say in what happened to his legacy. They had no idea what was really being planned. Because while they were focused on taking care of Elvis, on trying to keep him alive, on managing his chaos and his addiction and his slow-motion self-destruction, Priscilla was playing a completely different game. She wasn't trying to save Elvis. She was positioning herself for after Elvis. And when he died in August 1977, when that moment finally came, when the people who loved him were drowning in grief and shock and devastation, Priscilla was ready. She'd been ready for years. Because here's the brutal truth that nobody wants to say out loud. The people who loved Elvis when he was human, when he was scared, when he was broken, they were too busy loving him to protect themselves from what was coming. And the person who'd already moved on, she was too busy planning to be stopped. August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley dies alone in his bathroom at Graceland. 42 years old. The same fear that gripped him backstage in 1969, the fear of being forgotten, of being irrelevant, of not mattering anymore, that fear never left him. It just consumed him slowly until there was nothing left. And the worst part? He died believing he was right to be afraid. He died thinking the world had moved on. He died feeling abandoned by almost everyone who'd ever claimed to love him. Priscilla had been gone for years, not just legally divorced, gone, living in California, building her acting career, dating other men. She'd moved on with her life completely. And Elvis knew it. He felt it. The rejection, the abandonment, the reality that the woman he'd obsessed over, the woman he'd built into his perfect fantasy, had walked away and wasn't coming back. So when Elvis died, he died feeling like a failure. As a husband, as a father to Lisa Marie, who he barely got to see, as a man who couldn't keep his own wife from leaving him. And Vernon had to bury his son. Think about that for just a moment. Think about what that does to a father. You're not supposed to bury your children. That's not the natural order of things. Parents die first. That's how it's supposed to work. But Vernon had to stand at his son's funeral and watch them lower Elvis into the ground, knowing that his boy died too young, too lonely, too broken. Vernon was 61 years old, and he was already sick, heart problems, diabetes. The stress of managing Elvis's chaotic life for decades had destroyed his health. And now, with Elvis gone, Vernon was supposed to somehow hold everything together. He was supposed to manage the estate, protect Lisa Marie's inheritance, honor his son's legacy. But Vernon was dying too. He just didn't know how fast. And Priscilla saw it. She saw exactly how vulnerable he was. She saw the grief crushing him. She saw the illness weakening him. She saw the confusion and the overwhelm and the desperate need for someone to help him make sense of everything. And she positioned herself as that someone. Now here's where people get uncomfortable with this story. Because it's easy to paint Priscilla as some kind of monster, some calculating villain who rubbed her hands together and plotted Vernon's downfall. But that's not how manipulation works. That's not how people like this operate. Priscilla didn't show up at Vernon's door twirling a mustache. She showed up as the concerned ex-daughter-in-law, as Lisa Marie's mother, as someone who cared about Elvis's legacy and wanted to help protect it. She was sympathetic. She was supportive. She offered advice. She made herself useful. And Vernon, in his grief and his sickness, was grateful. Because think about his position. His son just died. The estate is complicated. There are debts, there are expenses, there are business dealings Vernon doesn't fully understand. Elvis's spending was out of control for years. The financial situation is a mess, and Vernon is trying to process all of this while his own body is failing him. So when Priscilla shows up and says, "Let me help. I understand the business side of things. I can work with the lawyers. I can make sure Lisa Marie's inheritance is protected," what's Vernon supposed to say? No. She's his granddaughter's mother. She was married to Elvis for 6 years. She's offering to help when Vernon desperately needs it. So he said yes. And that yes changed everything. Because within 2 years, Vernon was dead. He died in June 1979, just 22 months after Elvis. And in those 22 months, Priscilla went from being the ex-wife on the outside to being a co-executor of the estate with full legal authority. Vernon made her an executor. He gave her power. He trusted her. And the Presley family watched it happen, and they knew it was wrong. They knew Vernon wasn't thinking clearly. They knew he was being influenced, manipulated, pushed into decisions he wouldn't have made if he was healthy, if he was thinking straight, if he wasn't drowning in grief. But what could they say? How do you tell a dying man that his granddaughter's mother is using him? How do you accuse someone of manipulation when they're framing everything as help, as concern, as love for the family? You can't, not without looking like the villain yourself, not without appearing jealous or greedy or like you're causing problems during an already devastating time. So the family stayed quiet. They bit their tongues. They watched Priscilla insert herself deeper and deeper into the estate's operations. They watched her build relationships with the lawyers, with the accountants, with everyone who had decision-making power. And they desperately hoped, that when Vernon died, someone would step in and fix this. Someone would recognize that Priscilla shouldn't have this kind of control. Someone would protect the family's interests. But Vernon's will was already written, and Priscilla was named as one of 3 executors alongside the National Bank of Commerce and Elvis's accountant, Joseph Hanks. When Vernon died, the last barrier between Priscilla and total control died with him. Because here's the thing about being one of 3 executors when you're the only one with skin in the game, when you're the only one who understands media and publicity, when you're the only one with a strategic vision for what this estate could become, you don't need unanimous control. You just need to be the loudest voice in the room. And Priscilla was very, very loud. The bank deferred to her. They were financial managers, not visionaries. They didn't know how to build a brand or manage a celebrity legacy. Hanks was an accountant. He knew numbers, not entertainment. But Priscilla, she'd been in Hollywood. She'd been building her own career. She understood image, narrative, publicity. She knew how to position herself as Elvis's widow, even though she divorced him 4 years before he died. She knew how to frame herself as the grieving ex-wife who stepped up to save his legacy. And nobody questioned it. Nobody pushed back. Nobody said, "Wait, why is the woman who left him, who moved on with her life, who wasn't even there when he died, why is she the one making all the decisions?" Vernon thought he was protecting Lisa Marie by bringing Priscilla into the estate management. He thought he was ensuring his granddaughter's mother would safeguard her inheritance. He had no idea he'd just handed the entire Presley legacy to someone who would use it to build her own empire, while systematically erasing the family who'd actually loved Elvis. Vernon died believing he'd done the right thing. He died thinking he'd protected his family. He was wrong. And by the time anyone realized how wrong, it was already too late. For 45 years, we've been told the same story over and over again. And we believed it, because why wouldn't we? It's a good story, it's inspiring, it's redemptive. The story goes like this. When Elvis died, his estate was a financial disaster. Graceland was hemorrhaging money. The expenses were out of control. The debts were mounting. Lisa Marie's inheritance was about to disappear completely. The whole thing was on the verge of collapse. And then Priscilla stepped in. Priscilla the savior. Priscilla the business genius. Priscilla who had this brilliant idea to open Graceland to the public, turning it into a tourist attraction that would generate millions of dollars and rescue the entire estate from certain bankruptcy. She saved Graceland. She saved Lisa Marie's inheritance. She saved Elvis's legacy. That's the narrative. That's what we've been told in documentaries, in interviews, in books, in every piece of media about Elvis for the last 4 decades. And it's a lie. Not the whole thing. Graceland did open to the public in 1982. It did become wildly profitable. It did generate millions of dollars. Those facts are true. But the story around those facts, the narrative that Priscilla was a reluctant hero who had no choice but to step in and save everything, that's where the manipulation lives. Because here's what actually happened. Priscilla didn't save a failing estate. She created a crisis so she could be the solution. She exaggerated the financial problems so she could justify consolidating power. She made it seem like everything was falling apart so that when she took control, nobody would question her. And it worked perfectly. Because once you're the savior, you're untouchable. Once people believe that without you, everything would have collapsed, you can do whatever you want. You can push out family members and call it professionalization. You can deny people access to their own relative's home and call it security. You can pocket millions of dollars while blood relatives struggle financially and call it smart business. And who's going to stop you? Who's going to challenge the woman who saved Graceland? Nobody, that's who. So Priscilla built her empire. She negotiated book deals where she got to tell her version of the Elvis story, the version where she was the misunderstood wife, the devoted mother, the woman who truly understood him. She consulted on movies and TV shows, making sure the narrative stayed consistent with her image. She gave interviews, appeared on talk shows, collected appearance fees, all while positioning herself as the keeper of Elvis's memory. And every single dollar, every single opportunity, every single platform came from one source, the Elvis Presley name. A name she legally gave up in 1973 when she divorced him. Meanwhile, the Presley family, the actual blood relatives, the cousins who grew up with Elvis, the people who were there in that dressing room in 1969 when he was terrified, they got nothing. Worse than nothing, they got erased. Billy Smith, the cousin who stayed up with Elvis through countless sleepless nights, who knew him better than almost anyone, he was pushed out of Graceland. The Memphis Mafia members who dedicated their lives to protecting Elvis were fired, discarded, written out of the official history like they never mattered. And when these people struggled financially, when they needed help, when they reached out to the estate that bore their family name, they were told no. They were told the money wasn't available. They were told there were complications. Meanwhile, Priscilla was buying properties in California. Priscilla was funding her lifestyle. Priscilla was building her personal brand on the foundation of a man she divorced before he died. But here's the most devastating part of this whole nightmare. Here's the piece that reveals just how complete Priscilla's takeover was. Lisa Marie, Elvis's daughter, his only child, the little girl he adored, the person who should have felt most connected to her father's legacy, most at home at Graceland, most supported by the estate bearing his name. Instead, Lisa Marie grew up feeling like an outsider in her own father's house. She felt unwelcome at Graceland. She felt like she needed permission to access her own inheritance. She felt her relationship with her father's memory being filtered through her mother, a mother who had her own agenda, her own image to protect, her own version of Elvis she needed everyone to believe. And that's when you realize the full scope of what Priscilla did. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about control. This was about owning the entire emotional and historical landscape of Elvis Presley. Priscilla made herself the gatekeeper to Elvis. You want to understand him? Go through Priscilla. You want to tell his story? Get Priscilla's approval. You want to connect with his legacy? Accept Priscilla's version of events. Even Elvis's own daughter had to navigate her father's memory through the woman who divorced him. And Lisa Marie saw it. She lived it. She felt it every single day. That's why when she finally had the chance, she cut Priscilla out of her trust. She made it crystal clear, I don't want you controlling anything after I'm gone. I want my children to have what's rightfully theirs. I want this cycle of control to end. That wasn't a decision made lightly. That wasn't a daughter being cruel to her mother. That was Lisa Marie after a lifetime of watching Priscilla operate, saying, enough, no more. But Lisa Marie died in January 2023 before she could finish what she started. She died with the truth still locked inside her. She died before she could fully reclaim what was stolen from her father's family. And now it falls to Riley, Elvis's granddaughter, a woman who never even met her grandfather. She has to fight to honor her mother's wishes. She has to stand up to a grandmother who's had 50 years of practice manipulating public perception and controlling narratives. But here's what should terrify Priscilla. Riley isn't fighting alone anymore. Because connecting back to that opening night in 1969, back to that moment of fear and vulnerability, back to the people who were actually there holding Elvis's hand, those people's children are watching. Those people's families remember. The truth has been waiting 45 years to be told. And now it's coming out. The people who were there when Elvis was human, when he was scared, when he needed someone to believe in him, they're the same people Priscilla systematically erased. She took their jobs. She denied them access. She wrote them out of history. She stole their legacy and sold it back to the world as her own story. But you can't erase the truth forever. You can suppress it. You can control it. You can profit from the lie for decades. But eventually, someone finds the courage to speak. And once one person speaks, others follow. And the entire house of cards you built comes crashing down. Priscilla didn't save Graceland. She stole it from the people who actually loved Elvis. And 48 years after his death, the family wants their legacy back. If you believe blood family deserves to control their own legacy, drop a comment right now. If this story changed how you see Elvis's legacy, share this video before it disappears. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the battle for the truth about Graceland is just beginning, and what comes next will expose everything Priscilla spent 50 years hiding.